Okay.
I'm Meta Spencer, and today we're going to go to some coral reefs. How about that? Get on your scuba diving equipment and let's take off. I'm going to talk to Tom Gorell, who is the head of the Global Coral Reef Alliance, and I have heard that he knows more about coral reefs than anybody else in the world. And I know he came about it honestly, because I believe his father was also an expert on such matters, and he was brought up diving among the corals when he was a toddler, practically. Right, Tom?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's right.
So you know your way around the corals, and you have a new book out.
Actually, two books that are involved. This is the one that we just posted. I don't know if you can see it. I'm seeing a mirror image on my screen, but this is marine.
The title is Innovative Methods in Marine. Keep talking.
Ecosystem Restoration. Okay. On the cover is a photograph of a reef that we grew in Bali. At this point in this image, it's 4 years old. It was a reef that we grew in an area that was barren of corals and of fish. It was just basically bare sand with a few broken coral fragments. And so we built that reef on it, and the corals just grew incredibly fast, and huge numbers of fish moved in, and you can see different schools of fish at different levels. And these are corals that we put on as very small fragments. So this is an example of how we grow back marine ecosystems. An example of a coral reef, but actually it's much more general. It's about growing back all marine ecosystems. And so it's a 300-page book with 20 chapters that I edited. It is a sister volume to this book here, which is also available free on the web. And the issue is we're putting them out free on the web. This book is called Geotherapy, Innovative Methods of Soil Fertility Restoration, Carbon sequestration, and reversing CO2 increase. I mean, these two books are not actually brand new. They've been out for a couple of years, and we had to buy back the copyright to them to be able to post them free on the web. So in other words, these books have been available, but they're expensive, and so that's prevented people from getting the information that's needed. I mean, I'm a biogeochemist and a marine scientist. I'm from Jamaica, and I'm very involved with small island state developing issues. And I worked quite a number of years ago at the United Nations as Senior Scientific Affairs Officer for Global Climate Change and Biodiversity Issues at the UN Center for Science and Technology for Development. So we were involved in drafting the first UN Climate Change Treaty. And while I was at the UN, I was basically trying to put together information about innovative technologies that could be used for sustainable development that were not being utilized because people didn't know about them. Okay, I found there are a whole lot of them. I mean, one of them is a technology that I'm an inventor of, which we call BioRock technology, and that's how we grew this reef on the cover of this book.
I'm sorry, okay. BioRock technology?
BioRock, that's right. BioRock, or living stone. We grow back severely devastated marine ecosystems at record rates, and we do that using electricity. And in this book, this is the first publication on that. Now, everyone's alarmed about electricity to water, for a lot of good reasons. Huh? People are terrified about electricity to water because they think they're going to kill themselves. Huh? But in fact, the basis for all life is electricity.
We were speaking about something that right now has become, in the last month, a preoccupation of mine, and I may divert you by just asking about it. But do you know the name Michael Levin, biologist at Tufts?
Yes, I do know. I know him personally. Yes, I gave a talk to his group a couple of years ago. That's correct.
He has this notion of bioelectricity as allowing cells to coordinate among themselves in creating a larger organ or a larger entity, organism.
That's absolutely right. I mean, his work is fascinating. Sort of what he's shown is that as cells develop, as all forms of life develop, there's an electrical current that flows down the axis And that determines which end is going to be the head and which end is going to be the tail, so to speak. And along that axis that's defined by the electrical current flow, that determines, where the head goes, where the arms go, where the feet go, all that sort of thing, because that gradient actually sets off the whole process of cellular development, embryogenesis, the formation of adults. All of that is kind of triggered by this electrical current that sends signals as to which genes to turn on and off. Mm-hmm. And so he's been doing some really fascinating work with that on the role of that in cellular development. It's really the key to understanding how things grow from a single cell to the full organism and have everything in the right place, so to speak.
Oh, I'm
anyway.
So glad that you know each other, because I spend I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to describe his research in a Substack post, because I think it's so important. I want to share it with everybody, and yet it's way beyond me to be able to describe it. So it's nice to actually meet a friend who knows something about it. Anyway, I shouldn't have diverted you from your own story.
Well, but, no, it's relevant. I mean, what he's showing, his finding is that within a cell that's growing from an embryo, that the electrical current within it sets the pattern for all of the development that happens from then on. Mm-hmm. Okay. It turns on all the switches and turns them off at the right times and so forth. So it's very profound. Now, I'm talking about something that's at an even deeper level than that, though.
Oh.
And I'm talking about not the differentiation, but how all cells get their energy. Okay, the biochemical energy that all cells have is produced by an electrical gradient, electrical current that flows from outside the cell membrane through the cell membrane into the inside. And that flow is how all organisms make their energies. Universal, all forms of life do this. Okay, so it goes back to the very first ancestor of all forms of life that now live on Earth. And so basically
without that kick, nothing would get started as an embryo. We would be one cell, and that would be the end of it. Is that right?
More than that. Has nothing to do with development. The cell itself has electrical currents flowing from the outside into the inside of the cell. And so the cell makes enzymes that tap that electrical current to make the biochemicals that give us all our energy. ATP, NADP, and all of that. Those are all driven by those electrical currents. There's about a tenth of a volt potential voltage difference between the outside of the cell and the inside of the cell, and that drives everything. Now, when that voltage collapses, the cell dies. Okay, so it's absolutely essential to all forms of life. Every form of life that we know is driven this way. Okay, so and now the thing is that is a very low level of electricity, and that's what we use in our method. Now, I mean, let me give an example.
No, hold on. Let back up, because I really want to understand this.
Yeah.
Are you saying that throughout our lives, we're continually dependent on external sources of energy? Mm-hmm. In other words, it's not, we have to have input from someplace all the time. And the minute it turns off, kaput, we're out, we're gone.
Mm-hmm.
Where does this stuff come from?
Well, that's what's so interesting. Well, there's a lot of electrons flowing around in the environment. So there's natural electrical currents that flow because the ocean is an electrical conductor, and it's flowing through the magnetic field of the Earth. And so when the electrical conductor moves through the magnetic field, that actually creates electrical currents. So the movement of the water creates very small electrical currents, and obviously the faster the water moves, the bigger they are. And when you get to breaking waves and a smashing on rocks, you're talking about up to half a volt. Okay, natural electrical currents flowing through the environment, and basically all cells evolved a mechanism for tapping those currents in order to make energy billions of years ago. This is common to all forms of life. So we live off in some sense, those electrical currents. Now, we never realized that until we observed what the results of feeding trickle charge of electrical currents in. We're talking about very low levels, so low that you can barely measure the voltage or the current. We're talking about, you know, things you cannot feel.
Now, this is, sorry, but this is every cell, each cell in my body is always being fed by some kind of electrical voltage outside.
Yes.
And if one cell doesn't get its diet of electricity, that cell dies too.
Well, I guess so. I mean, I don't know if it can import it from its neighbors. That's an interesting question because there's some degree to which they can trade chemicals. But basically, the organism as a whole, the inside of the cell is reducing and the outside's oxidizing, and that creates a voltage gradient down which currents flow. And basically, all life is based on exploiting those currents. So, the fact is, what we observed is that when we feed very low trickle charges of electricity, now this is a zero frequency. Understand, this is like what you get from 3-volt battery. In fact, even lower. We're talking about a couple volts, so low you can barely measure it, so low that you can't feel it. Now, let me give an example. If we build a steel structure in the ocean, put it in the ocean, everyone knows the steel is going to rust and collapse. Okay, now when we apply just a couple volts of electricity to it, a bit more than 1 or 2 volts, what happens is the steel does not rust. This is a steel bar that's been in the ocean for years. This is from the Maldives. And then we grow solid limestone rock around it. And this is about 2 years worth of growth. And this is limestone that's about 2 or 3 times harder than concrete, ordinary Portland cement concrete. So we literally grew this layer by layer over about 2.5 years, and the steel didn't rust inside. It was protected from the corrosion. Okay, so with that, we can use very low voltage electricity to actually grow marine structures in the sea of any size or shape. Okay, now, when we build them the right size or shape, for instance, if we grow a reef-like structure in front of an eroding beach, that beach stops eroding and starts to grow back by itself without any dredging, without any dumping, without any pumping of sand. So we grow severely eroded beaches back at record rates simply by building or growing, if you will, a limestone structure, the same material that a coral reef is made of, limestone. And when we grow that in front of the beach, it breaks up the waves before they hit the shore, so they don't wash the sand away, and the sand accumulates instead of being washed away. So that's one feature. Okay, the other feature.
Excuse me, but is it the shape of this structure that's important, or is it the electricity that we're talking about that's going to be protecting the beach? Both.
Both. I mean, the thing is, what a coral reef is, it's a open mesh framework that waves go through but lose energy passing through. So it's full of holes and crevices. That's why it works. Okay, it's designed basically to filter water out to provide food. And because it does that so efficiently, it absorbs about, in some case, up to like 97% of the wave energy coming in the front. It's dissipated before it reaches the shore. And that's why every place you have a reef, you're growing a beach behind it, as long as the reef is growing. Okay. Now, since almost all the reefs in the world are now dead, those beaches that used to be growing are now essentially all eroding. Okay, that's a huge crisis worldwide. Sand is vanishing from beaches in every tourist area of the world, and people are predicting that half of all the beaches in the world will disappear this century, and that's assuming that global sea level rise does not increase, and that storm strength driven by global warming does not increase. That's assuming things stay exactly as they are now. We're going to lose half the beaches
because of the death of the coral reefs.
No, well, because of sea level rise and increasing storm strength. Now, but on top of that, global warming is what has killed almost all the coral reefs in the world. So the thing is, let me give an example. I've done quite a bit of work in Grand Cayman. They have a 7-mile beach. It's washing away. Hundreds of meters of that beach have vanished in years. Okay, and that's because The corals that used to live in front of it have died from global warming. There's almost none of them left, the corals that used to protect that beach. So
Mhm.
now the waves come right in. The corals are crumbling, they're collapsing, they're dead, they can't grow anymore. And on top of that, there's now no new supply of sand coming in to replace what is being washed away faster and faster. And sea level is rising by 4 millimeters a year. Okay. Now that's worldwide. It's rising faster in some places, and I just give you two examples. Not in Canada. Canada, by the way, has the longest coastline in the world, and we'll come back to that. But in the United States, your nearest neighbor, your only neighbor, as a matter of fact, the whole east coast of the U.S. and the whole Gulf of Mexico coast of the U.S. are all sinking. So sea level rise there is even faster than the global average by quite a bit. So these areas we're seeing, Miami, Houston, New Orleans, Baltimore, Washington, New York, Boston, all these places are headed for serious flooding in the next few decades, and they're totally unprepared for it.
Oh, all of this is new to me. I thought I knew something about I was worried about the coral reefs because that's the only thing I'm worried about is we want to keep coral reefs because that's habitat for all kinds of marine life. So, but that's not your only concern then. And
Yeah,
you want to go out and build structures even where there aren't coral reefs.
that's right. We can grow structures even where there aren't reefs. Now, I didn't mention the other part of this, and this is when we grow a reef like this that grows back a beach, we plant little fragments of coral on it. And those grow at record rates. And they're also, because they're being fed energy from the electricity, they're stronger, they're healthier, and they're able to resist bleaching under conditions that would normally kill them. So we keep whole reefs alive in places where they would die. And we grow them back in places where there's no natural recovery at all. Now, you'd have to see the pictures of that, but you can just see this picture yourself. But, of course, your radio audience can't see that, unfortunately.
Now tell me, is that picture there referring to what you just showed me with that white thing? Is
Mm-hmm.
that how you did it? You
Yes. Now, what's interesting here is this. I mean, say this book. Most of the chapters I should mention are by Indonesian students, okay, whose thesis research I supervised in Indonesia, and almost all of these projects in the world are in Indonesia. We've done this. So, um, this particular project we began 25 years ago. And at this particular location, we have about 150 reefs like this, but each one is a different size or shape. I mean, you have to see the video to see how amazing they are. Now, Bali is a culture of artists. And they're really, I mean, it's an incredible culture. And they are very much into their traditional Balinese Hindu culture. And they've built reefs that are in the form of Balinese Hindu temples and all that sort of thing.
really?
And mythological, they say, not this image, just this one is quite simple. But anyway, so it's a spectacular place to see. But the thing is, we can do this almost any place. And the fact is that worldwide we're losing our beaches. And where the corals, it's even happening even faster. But in cold waters, it used to be oyster reefs that protected the beaches or mussel reefs. And those are all pretty much all gone too because we've dug them up and eaten them.
Mhm.
Okay. I mean, for instance, on my road here, right here where I live in Cambridge, Massachusetts, the road sign used to say, to the oyster bank, 1632, because right down my road was the oyster bank that fed all the Boston area. It's gone. Yeah, I mean, there's no trace of it left. It's all been filled in with garbage and it's under tall buildings, So,
Well, commercially, I don't know whether you want to go with this, but commercially, could we encourage people to eat more oysters and start replenishing those reefs, or are they called
well,
reefs?
yeah, yes. I'm going tomorrow to the town of Sandwich, which is the south end of Cape Cod Bay, to talk to the oyster program people.
Mhm.
Now, in by and large, see what's happened is oyster banks are just one example. Coral reefs are another. Salt marshes are another. Mangroves are another. We've destroyed most of these coastal ecosystems. So I'm going to talk, more about coastal ecosystems in general. than about coral reefs. I mean, coral reefs are the most vulnerable of all, and they're the first we're going to lose. It's basically over for coral reefs. I have to be honest with you with global warming. But the point is that all other coastal ecosystems are threatened by sea level rise. If we don't protect our shorelines, we're going to lose them. We're headed for runaway global warming with the energy policies that the United States, Russia, Saudi Arabia, and all these other countries are pursuing. We're headed for runaway global climate change. There's no hope really for saving reefs, but the point is we have something like 60 or 70 meters of sea level rise ahead of us. It won't happen overnight, but that's where we're headed
I'm
right now.
shocked. Hold on, because I'm still reeling from what I'm hearing you say, which is all over for coral reefs. You're saying that we're not going to be able to save coral reefs, period.
We can save only what we actively save. That is to say, those things we're feeding energy into. So, for instance, I mean, Indonesia and the Maldives and Thailand, we've kept whole reefs alive that would have died just by feeding them energy from solar panels.
But
But
this is just plain heat, global
hmm?
warming. This is caused by the warming ocean. That these coral reefs are not going to survive. Period. Right?
No, because basically we've lost almost all of them. Okay, and last this year's the worst ever for the Great Barrier Reef. There's been massive mortality both on the
Really?
west coast and the east coast. The west coast reefs were better than the Great Barrier Reef. People don't know much about them, but those were devastated this year, and it's worldwide. I mean, the thing is, I wrote a paper on the 2023 temperature anomalies, which is the record. I have another paper coming out on the 2024 sea surface temperature anomalies. These were the worst we'd ever seen. And every place where it was unusually warm, corals died. But there are a lot of other things that are happening too. I mean, for instance, the whole circulation of the global ocean is changing. And what that's doing is that's pumping heat out of the tropics into the colder regions. The tropics are not warming up as fast as the Arctic is. I mean, that's my real concern now. I mean, we can't save reefs, but the point is the Arctic is the place that's going to be devastated next. We're going to lose the Arctic ice. We're going to start heating up, institute global warming feedbacks that are going to be extremely serious. And if we don't do something about reversing climate change, we're headed for melting Antarctica and Greenland in the long run. I mean, it's probably almost irreversible unless we start doing what we call solar radiation management, which is something a lot of people don't want to talk about. I mean, now the point about my books is both of these books is we know how to regenerate ecosystems to make them much more productive, to have much higher biomass, to store more carbon, to provide more ecosystem service to people. But that can't be done quickly enough, I'm afraid, to reverse it in time to save coral reefs. So we are headed for very serious devastation. The point is that the coastlines are where we're going to see that. Now, right now, as I said, it's rising 4 millimeters a year, more in the Gulf Coast of Mexico, the Gulf of Mexico coast, and the east coast of the U.S. But it's a worldwide problem. And everyone's pretending it isn't happening. Everyone is basically saying, we wait until the roads and airports fall into the sea after a storm, and then we throw a bunch of rocks in afterwards. Now, curiously enough, that's a strategy that humans have been doing for about 7,000 years. It's interesting, there's an archaeological remains of the first seawall known. That was in ancient Israel 7,000 years ago. And what happened is the people there were having a rising sea level problem flooding their village. And so they went miles inland and they rolled these huge boulders down to the shore and they built a wall of rocks. It's about 20 feet below sea level now. Okay. And it failed. The sea level came over it. But every couple of years, a big storm in the Mediterranean washes the sand over and reveals this ancient rock wall that was submerged that failed to stop sea level rise. Okay, 7,000 years ago. So we've been doing geoengineering for a long time. I mean, that may be one of the oldest ones I know, but in China they were doing geoengineering, digging canals to drain flooding rivers. 3,000 years ago or so. You know? So we've been doing geoengineering for a long time, but most of our geoengineering has made climate change worse. And
You know, 2 days ago, I did a forum with a guy in Denmark who has studied public opinion globally about geoengineering, seeing how much turns out most people are favorable. But when we talk about what the experts say, he says, "Oh, all of the experts agree that, you know, this is something we might have to do sometime, but that, of course, the important thing is the only thing that really you do now is work on carbon emission reduction." And as if this is just universally believed. And I said, carbon emission reduction ain't going to happen. And we better start doing the stuff that we need to do right now, because now is the time to deal with geoengineering. That's what I was saying 2 days ago. Sounds like compatible with what you're saying now, that we have to start doing urgent things because it's time.
yeah, well, let me give an example. See, what we've tried to do with these books is to look at what the limiting factors preventing ecosystems from being productive are. Okay, now on land, it's nutrients and fertility. Basically, all the trace elements come out of the soil. And in most places, they've been washed away. And what we find is we can regenerate soils by adding rock powders and adding what we call biochar, which is a form of carbon that was invented by the Amazonian Indians thousands of years ago that allows you to store carbon. Now, the reason we wrote this book was for a couple of years. I mean, first of all, I was searching for innovative technologies that small island states could use. And I ran to a bunch, and we wound up holding a bunch of meetings and conferences on this. And these wound up turning into these books after several years. Okay. Now, the point is that in this book, we have chapters from every continent, every soil type, every climate regime, every crop type, where people have taken soils that were devastated and regenerated their fertility. And each person did it by a somewhat different way. You know, they focused on a different method, but they did a job. And, you know, combining these methods allows us to greatly increase soil carbon. Now, one thing that's often forgotten is there's something like 5 or 10 times more organic carbon in soil than there is in the atmosphere or in all the vegetation. So when people talk about, you know, planting trees to remove carbon, they don't understand the soil is a major sink. Okay, and so is the ocean, the organic carbon in the ocean. So planting trees, people who make models and say, oh, well, we can't plant trees quickly enough to solve the problem, so we shouldn't bother, are missing the point that you have to treat it, the soil and vegetation system, as an integrated system, because most of the carbon is in the ground. It's not in the trees, you know.
So what should foresters be doing that they're not doing?
Well, the thing is, you have to address the fundamental fertility of the soil. Let me give an example. I'm of Panamanian background, and you know, the Panama Canal was, every tree was cut down 100 years ago when the Americans moved in to build the canal. They devastated the landscape, so there's no natural vegetation left there. Now, every time, and most of it, that land now is cattle pasture. Okay, it's the worst thing for the land. It just bleeds the soil into the lakes, and every time there's a dry season, the canal runs out of water. Okay, so now what we did there is we grew trees about 7 times faster by simply using the native basalt rock that underlies that land. Okay, there's basalt rock. Panama, it's a long story. Panama is very important for global climate change because it actually caused the ice age. That may sound strange. See, originally, Panama was an open ocean connection by which the waters from the Atlantic flowed into the Pacific. Okay, and when the Panama rose, it rose as a bunch of basaltic volcanoes that blocked that flow and created that isthmus that joins North to South America and stopped the Atlantic from flowing into the Pacific. At that point, the Atlantic waters turned around, headed back north, and became the Gulf Stream, which then dropped warm, delivered warm water into the Arctic to produce more snow that triggered the ice age. Okay,
Yes.
so the complicated part. But anyway, in Panama, those soils in the canals are the most infertile soils in the country. Okay, you can't grow anything in them. When you cut the forest down, it's barren. I mean, it's just like terrible. But underneath it is this incredibly rich basalt rock. And if you grind that up and spread it on the land, trees grow many times faster because it provides about 10 or 20 different essential trace elements. Doesn't provide nitrogen, which they need, but it provides almost everything else. So now what people are planning to do in Panama, because every time it gets dry, the canal stops working, the country loses money, et cetera, is people want to plant trees. Now, instead of hiring the local people to plant the trees and take care of them, people come and say, oh, we'll do it with drones. We don't need any people involved in this. We'll just drop the seeds from above and they'll grow by themselves. They won't. They're going to die because the soil's infertile. Okay, but there are lots of people with these high-tech schemes that totally cut the local population out of managing their own habitat or regenerating it for their own benefit so they can make a big profit dropping seeds from a helicopter, you know? I mean, well, these are the kind of development schemes we're getting, but we have to go to the fundamentals. And for soil, the fundamentals, what's in the soil. And that's why we need to remineralize the soil, because almost every soil is deficient in one or more of the 20 essential elements that all plants need to grow properly. So that's what this book is about. It's about managing soils to store more carbon and to be more productive.
Well, actually, you and I had a conversation with some other people
We
about
did.
2 years
We did.
ago, partly
Right.
about that issue. Uh-huh.
Right.
Well, that's good to
Now,
know. Very good to know. And
yes.
but do I need to scold my forester friends for not knowing, or are they really on top of that?
Well, no, many of them are not, because the point is that most spotters think the issue is putting the right seed in the ground, not paying attention to what the ground is, whether the ground can feed the seed, if you understand what I'm saying. So, really, you need to take a geological perspective on the soil resources. I mean, as an example, last year, it was earlier this year, we published a paper on India's potential to feed itself using its own rocks and soils. And the fact is, India is the world's largest population. The price of fertilizers have shot up because of the Ukraine war,
Mhm.
and Indian farmers can't afford to fertilize their fields anymore in a lot of cases. So it's a big issue. But India has incredibly rich basalt soils that could fertilize the land. They need biochar because biochar holds on to the nutrients. So what happens is the rock powder provides the elements that plants need, but the biochar binds it and holds it in the soil and holds the water, so it feeds it to the roots of the plant. Now, India is being overrun by invasive trees, in particular, a North American tree, which is mesquite. Prosopis juliflora, right? Okay, and they brought it into India by the forestry department. They planted it all over. It's just taking over the whole landscape. Every abandoned field is just taken over by these thorny bushes. And what we're trying to do is see that turned into biochar, combined with India's own basalt rock powders in order to make India feed itself. I think that's possible. Okay, now a lot of other
Let's
places.
go back for the moment back to your bioengineering, bioelectricity thing. Now, if you're talking about the chemicals in the minerals in the soil,
Mhm.
but it sounds like if for that seed to grow, it's going to need some kind of voltage too. What's in the soil that would provide the
Well,
voltage?
the voltage, well, our method, I got to say, our electrical method works in salt marshes, coral reefs, seagrasses, mangroves, all marine ecosystems, but it depends on the electrical conductivity of the water. Okay, so we put up small voltage, certainly just a couple volts you can't feel, and because seawater is an electrical conductor that flows. Now, fresh water doesn't work,
Oh,
unfortunately.
okay.
So it's just not conductive. So this is really strictly a marine technology. We can regenerate coastal marine ecosystems any place. in the world.
Okay, but now you were getting me worried about feeding India and whether or not there's enough minerals in the soil. Is there enough voltage in the soil in India? Or how does that
Well,
little seed get its the kick in the pants that get it going?
well, I would say that's an interesting question. I mean, the voltage comes from nature, between areas that have oxygen, which is a high voltage potential, and areas that don't have oxygen, and then it flows down that gradient. Okay, so oxygen is positive voltage, and then if you're down in say, sewage or anoxic muck at the bottom of a lake with no oxygen, then it's reducing and the voltage is lower. And so the electrons are constantly flowing. So nature has that. I don't know how to, in the ocean, we can accentuate that greatly. I don't think we can do that easily on land.
Okay.
Okay. In land, basically, we see it as a nutrition problem. In the ocean, I see it as more as an energy problem, a nutrition problem, because in the ocean, actually, all the elements are present in excess, except for nitrogen and phosphorus and a couple of trace elements, iron and other elements that are essential for enzymes in living matter. So, but the ocean doesn't have the same mineral limitations. But what we find is we feed it electricity, they just grow faster, they resist stress that would kill them, they grow back in places they wouldn't. And we increase the biodiversity amazingly. That's the other thing.
Now let's go back to where you're going to save all these beaches. And you've got thousands or millions of miles of coastal line water where you want to put some sort of metal structures which are going to impede the flow of waves and produce enough voltage to start making these limestone things, right? Have I got
Right.
that?
Well,
You're going to do
right.
that
Right.
to
Uh,
thousands and millions of. Now, what are these structures going to look like? I mean, you can't just put one little a piece of metal like you've shown there around Australia and hope that'll do it. You've got to build a big system of
yes,
structures or
you need,
something.
you need, you need solar panels to power it. That's correct. But now the other aspect of this is what you don't see here is the whole ecosystem that grows all over it, like you see in this picture in this book. See, this is underneath all that, and you can't even see it. It's buried under this
Yeah.
huge amount of biomass that grows all over it. So really, what we're trying to do is regenerate the biomass, regenerate the biodiversity, and regenerate the fisheries habitat. Now, the thing is that, see, worldwide, every coastal ecosystem is dying. Okay, now you have to talk to the oldest divers to see it. Now, I'm one of them, unfortunately, and I'm just back from getting a copy of the first underwater film ever taken of healthy reefs in the world. It shows my father in Jamaica in 1957 diving in a reef that's gone. It's gone. I mean, there's just no trace of that stuff left. So, but the truth is that people who are diving now don't have a clue what they've lost because they never saw it. It's gone so long ago. It's only the very oldest divers who remember what's gone. Now, we now have a situation where countries are calling for the so-called blue economy. And the idea is that the ocean is going to make money by growing things that are economically useful. But the fact is we're killing all of our coastal ecosystems through global warming, through pollution, through diseases, pathogens that we're introducing from indiscriminate use of antibiotics and so forth. So we're killing every coastal ecosystem that we know of is in collapse and is dying.
Mhm.
So if we don't grow those back, we're not going to be able to stabilize our coasts. If we don't store that carbon in sediments and soils, we're not going to be able to solve the CO2 problem. Now, we can't do that quickly enough to solve the problem by itself, but it is an essential part of the solution. So we can't say, it's not worth restoring ecosystems. We have to do that anyway because we have to get CO2 down to safe levels because it's dangerously too high already.
Okay,
And
now tell me more about these structures that you're building. I mean, what are they like? Like a mesh fence or something like that? How
no,
big
no, no. And actually, you often you can hardly see the structure because they're so buried under with corals and other things growing all over them.
Oh,
So,
but when you first put them out there, you're going to go out there with a boat and you're
you
going
know,
to dump in something that looks like a cage or a
right,
bird cage or something, and
that's right.
it's got a battery. It's got something that's going to provide voltage to it. What does this thing look? Show me one before you put it in the water. Do you have a picture of one of the
Well, I
structures?
don't have one right in front of me, but basically it's just like a steel cage. I mean, let me put it this way: the most common building in the world is reinforced concrete. The weight of reinforced concrete in the world now exceeds the entire biomass of the world. You know that. It's more
No.
concrete and asphalt than there are trees and plankton in the world. That's how much we've altered the world. Okay. But if you take a concrete wall that everybody builds for every concrete building that they make, they get the steel framework, they bend it, they twist it, they wire it together, they weld it together, and they make a steel framework. Okay, then what they do is they buy a lot of plywood. Okay, that's some whole forests that have been cut down. They build the plywood forms and they pour in the concrete, Portland cement. Now, the Portland cement, every kilogram of Portland cement produces a kilogram of CO2 into the
Yeah.
atmosphere. And then you have to add 80% of aggregate, just sand or something else that you've stolen from somebody else to dump in and mix with your concrete. Okay, and that has a lot of embodied energy for transport. Very expensive. Concrete is expensive to
But
transport.
look,
So,
I actually know, I once did know quite a lot about concrete because did a whole series of shows about
yeah,
carbon negative concrete. There's an outfit in California that makes concrete that actually
right.
sequesters rather than emits
Right.
net
Well,
carbon.
it's more close to neutral. But actually, what we're doing with this, with the limestone we're growing, is we're taking dissolved bicarbonate and alkaline in the ocean. We're turning it into rock that can remain stored for millions of years. Okay. So in fact, we are this structure, this material here is 2 times harder than concrete, and it's carbon negative.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It's actually carbon negative. So yes, so we can produce carbon negative building construction material cheaper than reinforced concrete. Now, so what people do when they build a seawall in the Pacific, they import the steel across the Pacific. They import all the concrete across the Pacific. They import all the aggregate and rocks from across the Pacific. I mean, the cost is just incredible. And they build a seawall that's a vertical wall. They all fall down in many cases before they finish building them because a vertical wall simply can't stand wave forces. You know, when a wave hits a vertical wall, it washes away all the sand in front. Then it washes away the sand underneath until the whole thing collapses and you have to keep rebuilding it. So, it's planned obsolescence, but every single seawall that's been built in these things is very expensive. Now, what we do costs a fraction as much. We have to import the steel. We have to weld it into a form, but that's it. Then what we do is we hook up a solar panel, we charge it. We don't import concrete. We don't import plywood from Douglas fir that's been cut down in British Columbia. We don't import any of that stuff. We just charge it with solar panels. We grow the
Solar
whole
panels
structure.
will do it. You don't need to keep going back and changing your battery or something.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Well, the thing is, batteries are useful if you want 24-hour power.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and that is very useful in many cases.
Oh, okay. Hmm. Okay.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
you
for
do
example,
sometimes you
yeah, I mean, first when it's very hot, it's hot at night as well, you know, and
uh
so that's where you might want 24-hour power because the electricity is actually what makes the coral stronger and more able to resist stress. It's that they're being fed energy basically. I mean,
because it sounds like you're saying that you can do this on the cheap, that it's cost effective. Is that right?
right, but there's no funding for it. I mean, what's happened is I've written proposals for about a dozen different small island nations all across the Pacific, the Indian Ocean, and the Caribbean that all face critical erosion problems. Some of these, I've lived in every atoll country in the world. They're all about to disappear. Okay? It's a matter of really the next big tsunami or big storm wave for a lot of them. Okay. Now, all of the money that foreign aid agencies have given them has gone into building concrete walls that fell down.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been huge kickbacks for the companies that shipped that stuff abroad and the consulting engineers who did that. And of course, the kickbacks to the politicians who approved those projects. So it's a very lucrative business, but it doesn't work. Now, I've written proposals for the governments of all these countries. I mean, for instance, for Tonga, we sent in a proposal to the European Climate Adaptation Fund to grow reefs to protect the coast of Tonga from erosion before the Tonga volcanic eruption and tsunami. And, they never heard back. The same thing for Tuvalu and Kiribati and every country that we write proposals from. The international agencies don't respond to this urgent need for shore protection. The money isn't there, I don't think. I just don't think they have the money to actually protect people from sea level rise. And I mean, the feeling I'm getting is that the international agencies just want to congregate people on the highest sandbanks so they can evacuate them more readily later. But there's essentially nothing going. These countries could be protecting themselves with their own endogenous resources. Now, for example, there's enormous amounts of energy in the thermal gradient of the ocean that's completely untapped. The small island states are out there and they have unlimited ocean energy. They don't have the technology to tap it. But with that, we could grow floating reefs for tuna fish, for all sorts of other marine things, and build up the productivity out in the open ocean as well as in the coastal zone. And these can be incredibly productive zones. I'm an advisor to the UN Sustainable Floating Cities Initiative. And the goal there is to build floating cities, basically places that need them. But the first pilot project is supposed to be in Busan in South Korea. But anyway, the point is there's a realization that with coastal flooding, coastal cities are going to have to move someplace. There's no way around that. Mm-hmm. And so there's the beginnings of an effort to try to develop this technology. Unfortunately, it's at this point so expensive that they're not really discussing applications for atoll islanders. They're discussing applications for people who happen to live in rich countries and would like to have basically a floating house. Okay.
I wonder what else have you got? Anything new that is on the same level as this building of electrical structures in?
Well, there's a worldwide sand crisis because there isn't enough sand, and most of that is coming from the building boom. You need sand to mix into concrete, and most of that is coming out of rivers. They don't like beach sand. Beach sand isn't rough enough. It doesn't roll around and tumble as much, but the stuff that's in rivers is kind of rotating all the time. So it's got the texture. Now, you see, it's not just concrete. Asphalt also uses 80% sand in aggregate.
Oh, so I didn't know that.
Yes, so asphalt is also, and if you use sand that's too smooth, the asphalt doesn't stick to it and it ruins the whole batch. So they're very fussy about that stuff. And so worldwide, people are stealing sand on multi-billion-dollar levels worldwide. I mean, sand theft.
Yeah, I've heard, but I don't know what to do about it. Is there a solution?
Yeah. Well, it's a big problem. Now, only some of that sand is for beaches. And for beaches, see, sand comes in two types. Okay, one is quartz sand, which is silica, and that's what gets eroded out of igneous rocks. So basically, you have the Appalachian Mountains or something like that, the Himalayas, the Andes. They break down; the little quartz grains break loose, and they get washed down the rivers to the sea, and they make beaches. And those are what we call I call yellow or brown sand beaches. Then the other kind of sand is limestone. It's this stuff, bright white. Okay, that's what corals make. And people call that coral sand, but actually it's almost all made up from a kind of small algae that makes limestone. Yeah, it doesn't come from corals. And we can grow that. We can actually, and that's the thing, sand isn't a zero-sum game that we have to steal from our neighbors. We can actually grow white limestone beach sand. And what we did at this particular site here, where this photograph is in Indonesia, we have about 150 reefs like this, and they're down below the reef there used to be a beautiful reef that went right up to the shoreline, and it all died from high temperatures in 1998. The first time I went there, it was all dying. And so when we started growing back corals, we didn't want to grow on top of the dead reef. We went down onto the sand on the bottom below it. This is about, you know, 20 feet deep, 7 meters or so deep. So we built there. And now what happened then was two things. One is the dead reef grew back by itself. We didn't put any corals on, it grew back by itself over 10 years. That was really amazing. But the other thing is that we produced so much white limestone sand that piled up underneath all of these reefs that we were growing that we changed the color of the beach. Now, when we began, there was a hotel on the shoreline and the beach had washed away. Okay, the trees were falling into the sea. The guests would go out at low tide. They'd put their beach chairs out. And high tide, they'd have to go and swim. So they built a concrete wall to keep the trees from collapsing into the sea. And that only sped up the erosion. We weren't trying to do anything about that. We were just trying to grow back the corals in deeper water. But over that following 10 years, that beach grew back and it changed color. It had been black volcanic sand that burnt your feet when you walked barefoot across it in the sun. And we produced so much white limestone sand from the reefs that piled up on the shore that actually we grew back a beach that was a different color than the original beach. And we've done that in several other places. So that point is that we can actually grow beaches back and protect them, even if it's too warm for corals.
I want to ask you about something completely different. The darkening of the ocean. Now, as I got it, and correct me because I'm probably wrong, there are large areas of the ocean where the amount of light going, how deep it goes, is less and less. Where, let's say, it went 3 meters or 300 meters or what, it's getting so that only the top 100 meters or 100 feet or whatever is light enough to be anything be visible in that little top layer of the ocean. And that is where a lot of the marine life lives. So that when you reduce the amount of the photic zone of the ocean, where there's light, you reduce the food chain, and this is bad news. But this is happening in various places. I don't know that it's caused by global warming. I don't know.
Yes, no, it is. It is. It is a considerable part. I mean, partly by that and partly by pollution. So let me say a few things about this. This is something that I've seen all my life, because when I was a little boy, I could see my father diving 300 feet below me. Okay, I'd swim on the surface. I could say, you can't do that anymore. Those waters that used to be clear and blue are dark and green now because of all the land-based sources of pollution, the eutrophication, the nutrients that have caused essentially continuous harmful algae blooms. And what that's doing is that some of these are toxic. They cause mass die-offs, fish kills, but not only fish kills. I mean, corals and all sorts of other things die when these things go haywire. And they cause dead zones because there's so much organic matter piling up. Now, I saw the first dead zone in the world that was caused by people when I was a boy. It happened in Kingston Harbor in Jamaica. When I was a boy, we had coral reefs inside Kingston Harbor. I would swim in them. But when I was a boy, also the whole harbor went anoxic because of all the sewage we're dumping in. And a Jamaican scientist, Dr. Barry Wade, who's my father's student, was the person who discovered that from one year to the next, everything in the bottom of the harbor died. It all went anoxic. And that was the first human-caused dead zone. But we're seeing those spread in all coastal zones because of all the sewage that we're pumping into the water and agricultural residues. So that's wiping out coastal ecosystems. It's also fueling invasive species. So in every part of the world, we have exotic species that have come in from someplace else, often in ballast waters and shipping. Sometimes, barnacles on boats, who knows? But we're seeing species showing up on the other side of the world from which they came and completely taking over. Okay, all around the world. I mean, it's just with fish, with algae, with a lot of other things. So our coastal ecosystems are all dying. Now, in terms of the ocean becoming darker, well, in coastal zones, that's because of the land-based sources of pollution, and that's causing more phytoplankton. So those areas are becoming more productive, and therefore that's absorbing the light further down. Now, in the open ocean, we're seeing the opposite. The open ocean is becoming bluer. And what's part of the reason there is there's less phytoplankton in most of the open ocean. That's a result of global warming because the nutrients are down in the cold, deep water. Surface water has almost no nutrients because the life strips it all out. It's food for them. They use every bit they can get. And so the new supply of nutrients depends on how quickly that water moves. Now, as global warming happens, we're getting this warm surface layer that's getting thicker and thicker on top, and that cold, deep water can no longer mix up to the surface. So we're seeing upwelling zones kind of disappear, becoming much less active. Now, 90% of the global productivity of the oceans in the coastal zones and the upwelling zones. And this is something that's very important politically because what I've found all my life is that the coastal zone is the interface between the land and the sea, and no one's responsible for it. It's the most impacted zones where we dump all our garbage. Okay, we don't pay attention to it. Now, the land managers ignore the coast because it's not the land. The ocean managers ignore the coast because it's not the sea. And what's happened with all of our marine science funding and work is that has gone to blue water, big ship oceanography, and these guys are terrified of shallow water. They won't come close to the coastal zone, and that's where all our food comes from. That's where almost all of the harvestable productivity of the ocean comes from. It's the area that's most severely damaged, and it's the least studied. No one's responsible for it. That's what's kind of shocking.
Oh dear. Okay. All right. So
And that's what we have to regenerate is our coastlines.
this is the effect of global warming.
Well, global warming is, yes, global warming is increasing the stratification of most of the ocean, meaning that the phytoplankton are decreasing. That's not true along the coast where they're being fed from the sides. And it's not true where upwelling is increasing, but by and large, upwelling is slowing down because remember, the overall mixing of the ocean is slowing down as the surface becomes too warm to mix down. Okay, we're seeing a failure.
You've given me, way more than I can digest. But let's see if you can give me a little shot of something that will give me hope. If you had to create an agenda for saving the oceans and the coastal areas and the beaches and so on, what would be your new laws or regulations? Give me 10 or 3 things to do that will turn all this around.
Well, what I'd say is we have the techniques to regenerate these ecosystems. We have the knowledge to do it, but we don't have the will or the policy, the funding. Everyone's pretending it isn't happening.
Put it into, 50 words and I'll circulate it. The problem is it is so interesting and so complicated that, I have trouble absorbing it myself, much less promoting it as a political agenda. So if we could get it into a list of 10 points, then I can do something to help. Otherwise, I find it fascinating, but too big to handle. Make me a list of 10, no more than 10, maybe 5, in regulations or innovations or, international laws or whatever that will, if adopted, reduce these dangers.
Fact is, the politicians don't have a clue. They're all into
that's what
destroying the environment.
That's what we have to do. We have to think politically. We have to think in terms of in public opinion and influencing people. And we have to be able to say it in what do they call them? Elevator speeches. You've got to be able to make your pitch in the length of time it takes you to get from the first floor to the 10th floor.
Mm-hmm. Well, as I say, the techniques are there. We just need to use them.
I mean, you are my favorite expert on everything. So there, you know more about the oceans than anybody should ever know, but good for you. And it's beautiful. So let's get together again. And I want to hear the next stages in this saga of saving the beaches and the
Okay.
Okay.
Well, a pleasure talking to you.
Okay. It's
Take
been
care.
a fun time. Carry on. Bye-bye.